we're covering. The absolute horror in Minnesota, a man assassinating a state representative and her partner, injuring another. Democratic lawmaker Melissa Hortman and her husband killed in cold blood, as they say, in their own home Saturday. The suspect had posed as a police officer to take advantage of their trust, to try to gain access to what would be his victims. He came to their home after shooting and wounding a Democratic state senator and his wife. Authorities have now caught their suspect, 57-year-old Vance Bolter. There was a 2-day manhunt. He did appear in court today, facing murder charges, and separately could face a federal death penalty case. Now, he listed over 45 state and federal elected officials as his potential political targets. That's drawn from notebooks found in his car. Officials today condemning this political violence.
And this was a political assassination, which is not a word we use very often in the United States, let alone here in Minnesota. It's a chilling attack on our democracy, on our way of life. I hope it's a wake-up call to everyone that people can disagree with you without being evil or needing to be killed or hurt.
That is the state of the authorities' briefing and the call for people to find other ways to address our political differences. But political violence right now is a problem so grave it is becoming almost routine, the New York Times reports, likening it to school shootings, where slowly but surely political violence has moved from the fringes to an inescapable reality. Violent threats, even assassinations, attempted or successful, have become part of the political landscape, a steady undercurrent of American life. Now, we cover these things, we live through these things. Each individual incident will have its specific facts. Some take longer to learn. There are shooters who've proven to be essentially lone wolves or just completely mentally unstable. There are others who seem to want to at least join or be a part of some larger political movement, effort. The rising violence, we know, has targeted individuals who are members of both parties, from Democratic lawmakers this weekend and former Speaker Pelosi's home invasion to Republican leaders like Steve Scalise and last year, then-candidate Trump. Well, this is a risk and a problem across the spectrum. We do know that. And authorities are careful when investigating motive or cause in any case. More broadly, there's also a context, because more than any other leader in modern times, Donald Trump has engaged in official acts, uses of his power to help the people who are violent. He used his pardon powers on his first day in office to free people convicted of political violence, people who targeted Congress, who brutally and violently attacked police, and even the most serious offenders, once thought unthinkable to pardon. He pardoned and freed from prison those convicted of violent crimes against the United States itself, including sedition. Now, over the weekend, Donald Trump did clearly condemn the attacks in their aftermath. He also, reporters note, has spent years raising the temperature on the mainlining and the rhetoric around potential violence. Reading from the New York Times today, more Americans view rival partisans as a threat to the country, even as inhuman. Trump has had a hand in that, they write, the Times reporters. He has signaled at least his tacit approval of violence against his political opponents. He encouraged attendees at his rallies to knock the hell out of protesters, defended the rioters on Jan 6, who clamored to hang Mike Pence, that, of course, political violence against a Trump ally who had just refused to break the law. The Times continues, quote, one of his first acts in his second term as president was to pardon those rioters. The pardons I just mentioned that, of course, used power to free the convicts of political violence from U.S. prisons. Now, this weekend, many Republican leaders, elected officials in Congress, did condemn the attacks. Some prominent MAGA voices, though, minimized or lied about these attacks, just as some did during the 2022 attack on the Pelosi household. Take an example that is notable. Over this weekend, Republican Senator Mike Lee spreading misinformation after the attack, showing the murder suspect here, posting this to his many followers, and stating, quote, this is what happens when Marxists don't get their way. Then he made what could be called a sort of tasteless murder joke, linking the attacks to Governor Tim Walz with this sort of pun, nightmare on Wall Street. Lee viewing the assassination as a chance to jump in and blame the left, when in this instance it was liberal lawmakers targeted, and authorities viewed this and have said it was politically motivated violence. He was doing this during a manhunt, when it would be, of course, unknown whether further lawmakers or police or citizens could be hurt. This is how he is using his platform, his power, his followers. The senator trying to basically outflank MAGA figures in the conservative state of Utah. He has folded on any past objections to Trump, as The Atlantic recently documented in a profile of this Republican's now many reversals. You need the history and the context to see how someone who is a U.S. senator, who is in our leadership body in this country, responds to political violence that way. Lee pushing a kind of vitriol and misinformation in the face of dangerous political violence, even as a manhunt is underway, even before the person is caught. And so tonight we should also note it is a long ways from how Senator Lee opposed Trump throughout the 2016 general election and said it was Trump's irresponsible statements that were his reason to avoid associating with him or empowering him.
I've been thinking a lot about some of his statements and how they're affecting people, how they make me feel. I wouldn't hire that person. I wouldn't hire that person, wouldn't want to be associated with that person. And I certainly don't think I'd feel comfortable hiring that person to be the leader of the free world.
Yes, you can hear the politician's pauses, the idea that this is coming from a deep place and that it pains him, but he certainly wouldn't want that person in charge. Lee claiming to oppose that association, that type of vitriol, those statements, the type of thing he responded to and referred to then. Now he's clearly trying to outdo the most fringe reactions online. He's drawn rebukes from his Minnesota colleague in the Senate, Amy Klobuchar, over the disgusting and depraved response from him. And so, in that sense, both things are true. There are political leaders in both parties who have clearly condemned what happened this weekend, this type of assassination, and President Trump himself said so. There are others, though, like Mike Lee, who can't even do that now, who wants to add fuel to a fire that is part of the reason that there is so much violence and there is risk and problems out there. And then you have the history. Is it enough in America to say the right thing for a day at a time if you use your power to coddle and free the individuals who have done some of the most notable political violence of the last several decades, the convicted sedition and insurrection at our Capitol? It is not to say these things are all causal. I've taken great care, as many journalists have, to tell you what we know about this individual and talk about how each case can be different. But it's also not a time to cover our eyes and pretend that we didn't just live through years of escalation, rhetorical and through the use of governmental power, that says sometimes some violence will be excused, minimized, lied about, or even rewarded. You take each case as it comes. Sometimes you learn things over time. In journalism, to say nothing of criminal law, causation is something that is not usually even possibly provable on the first few days of many stories. So I don't refer to causation when I refer to a history of escalating, minimization, and sometimes rewarding of violence here. And so I'm curious your, as always, reasoned, responsible, but thoughts or concerns about that tonight.
No, that's absolutely true, and I'm very concerned about it because that's the atmosphere. You're absolutely right about causation, and the first thing you learn in journalism is never assume. You never assume anything. You can't assume that it's because of this rhetoric and because people say things that they didn't used to say out loud, at least. You can't assume that that's why these horrible murders were committed and shootings were committed. Nonetheless, it is the atmosphere. That is where the country is. It's not where we were a decade ago or a decade before that. Things have changed. And if you can point really to Donald Trump 10 years ago, entered the political scene using language that we had not heard in our politics for many, many, many years. And that clearly has had an impact on the tone and tenor of our political discourse. And so we can't say it led directly to what happened this weekend, but that is where we are right now. It's very different from where we used to be.